Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When the folks at the state's corrections department have their holiday party, it might count for a family gathering as well. A recent investigation has shown the links within the system. We'll also look at a newspaper's inquiry as to what health care will be like in the state under the new presidential administration and with the anticipated cuts. Politics is never too far away. We will look at what to expect in the new year, and we will examine the condition of the offshore drilling business. In a week in which the city offered a settlement in the Danziger shooting case, we'll look back at the particulars of that case. On our list are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, The New Orleans Advocate. Kathy Finn, freelance journalist. And Kevin Allman, editor for Gambit. And we're going to go on over to Gordon first. And the Advocate has been doing, a months-long, back into 2015, investigation into Louisiana state prison system, including the now former retired warden. But there's a whole lot of linkages beyond that. And we're talking about family linkages who are also working for the system.
Yeah, it's kind of it's always been a business that's had a lot of families who, people who come up in the system and who stay in that system. So in some sense, it's not totally unusual, but the sheer numbers of relatives of important, influential people in the correction system who go into that system and then often are promoted to high positions within the department is sort of eyebrow raising. And, we talked to, first of all, we set out to map these connections and show who was in position, which relatives had influential positions. For instance, if you look at Errol, who was the longtime warden of the Angola prison, his son was a warden of another prison. Another son had a high-ranking position. His son-in-law is like the number 2 official in the corrections department, and his best friend, Jimmy LeBlanc, is the secretary of the department, which is the top position. And Jimmy LeBlanc has a number of nieces and other relatives, not sons, but close relatives within the department. And a lot of these people occupy positions of authority, and so we set out to map those relationships and also to see how it might be influencing policy decisions and who gets rewarded and who gets punished and those kinds of things in the department.
Like you said, you set out to map it, and you literally did that. There is a chart that you can click on online, and then it's in the paper as well. When was that published? Earlier this week?
That was published a week ago, Sunday.
If you take a look at it, it's really pretty eye-popping at just how intense the linkages are.
Yeah.
But overarching all of this is that it's not against the law.
Correct. The nepotism laws in Louisiana say that you can't supervise immediate family members, but you can supervise nieces and nephews and things like that. And then in some cases you had, for instance, Errol had some of his sons working in the department, but they were not under his direct supervision. In some cases, they were under the supervision of his best friend, but they, as far as we can see, no nepotism laws have been violated.
What role does, if any, does civil service play in all this?
Well, it would be up to civil service and/or the ethics board to enforce what they see as a violation of the nepotism law. And if somebody had a complaint and said, well, so-and-so got promoted because of who they are, they could file a complaint with either the Civil Service Commission or with the ethics board.
Has that happened?
Not that I'm aware of. And I think a lot of employees, we sort of became aware of these connections largely from hearing from employees. And I think in a lot of cases, the employees felt like they were going to do damage to their careers by making complaints like that. A lot of them didn't even want to say who they were when they would call. I also received a lot of anonymous letters and things. Once we began writing about this, the floodgates kind of opened.
Now, Jimmy LeBlanc, as you said, is the Secretary of Corrections, but Errol is no longer
correct
warden, and that was following a report that you all did last year.
Right. We wrote a story about a year ago in which we showed that he had done business with some relatives of inmates who were seeking special treatment, and that was seemed to be a violation of correctional policy, although they did an internal investigation which found that it was not a violation, which was one of the other things we traced in this last over this last year, is how in many cases the department seemed to go out of its way to excuse behavior that seemed to be, banned in its own rules.
Now, his son, though, was the warden at which
At
facility?
WYES Correctional Center.
And
there's
what
also
happened there is pending before a grand jury.
Yeah, there's a number of things that are being investigated there. I mean, he was accused of avoiding bid laws by building a new house for himself using the state credit card. There's a lot of potential abuse of the state credit card, a lot of purchases they can't figure out the business purpose for. There was a lot of money missing from inmate clubs. The inmates have these fundraisers and they raise the money in cash, and it's up to prison officials to count the cash and deposit it, and a lot of that money is missing. And I'm forgetting one other thing. There's a number of things that are under investigation.
Just looking at the big picture, the governor in his year-end review talked about the prison system and said that one thing he wants to look at is the possibility of reducing the number of inmate days that we have there.
Right.
It's probably not related to this, but what has to be done? What's the problem?
Well, I mean, and it's related in the sense that they are attempting this ambitious overhaul of the prison system so that we're not the most incarcerating state anymore. We are the most incarcerating state by a large margin. Mostly that has to do with our laws, and that we have very punitive, we have a lot of mandatory minimums, very harsh multiple offender laws. We don't give a lot of paroles or things like that. So they're looking at making changes to all of those things in terms of, getting people, not having everybody serve such long sentences. Another thing that needs to be done is better rehabilitation within prison, and we've always sort of done incarceration on the cheap in Louisiana, which has been shown to not be effective, in that if you just lock people up for 23 hours a day and then let them out when their sentence is over, they're often not ready to rejoin society, and they commit new crimes.
State prisoners are often held in local jails where there would perhaps not be a rehabilitation type of program.
Right. The thing is sort of upside down, in that the guys who get the most rehabilitation at present tend to be guys who are at Angola, for instance, who might never get out of prison, but they're learning how to be car mechanics and so forth. And meanwhile, the guy who's serving a 5-year sentence in a local jail isn't getting anything that's going to help him when he gets out.
We've seen some movement in the legislature and joining of really sort of what would seem to be not usual bedfellows for the move for lower incarceration, because it's bad business on both sides.
Right. I mean, the new buzzword is smart on crime, but I mean, everyone can agree that it's expensive, I guess. And so that, there's always been, traditionally there was sort of, the right was more like, let's have long sentences. Let's, make sure people serve 85% of their time and so forth. And it's grown to be such a huge cost that there's sort of been a wide agreement that we need to do a little less of this.
Okay. All right, Gordon. Well, we'll be continuing to look at what you guys uncover in the weeks ahead. And once again, that chart is really something to see if you want to go take a look at it. Okay, we're going to go on over to Kevin now. And everybody's just kind of wondering what is really going to be happening with the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act has had an impact on the state of Louisiana and the New Orleans region.
It has. In a very brief time that it's been, that we've accepted the Medicaid dollars under Governor Edwards. 365,000 more people now are insured than were a year ago. And 24,000, I believe, is the figure in New Orleans itself. So it's a significant number.
So with the Medicaid expansion, which, as you point out, just really began when, Governor Edwards signed the bill the day after he was inaugurated.
Right.
He brought it on board, Medicaid expansion, which Bobby Jindal had refused to do. Since that time, 360,000 people have signed up since it came on board July 1st. That, of course, is a big part of the ACA, of the Affordable Care Act. What happens if that is taken away?
Well, as John Bell Edwards signed the bill on day one, Donald Trump has said he will repeal the ACA on day one. And there's some question about how that would happen. But Steve Scalise, who's our representative and the majority whip in the House, has indicated that he's going to be pushing that through as quickly as he can as well. At first they were talking about repeal and replace. Now the emphasis is on the repeal with the replacement coming later. So no one really knows. And we talked to state healthcare providers, we talked to Mayor Landrieu, we talked to people in Washington, and right now there's just a great uncertainty as to what's going on. Donald Trump has sent mixed messages on several things since the election, but the people that he's got in place with Tom Price at Health and Human Services, Paul Ryan is advising, and Paul Ryan would like to see all this rolled back as well. The people he's got in place are definitely opponents of the Affordable Care Act.
Are there any areas that it seems like the Trump administration might compromise on?
It's difficult to compromise on this one bill because it's either repeal it or don't repeal it. It's not an either or. Trump has said some things in the past where they like to keep parts of it, but how that would happen is kind of unclear. And the two things that are very popular among Louisianans that UNO survey showed, one is keeping adult children on their parents' policy until the age of 26, and the other is forcing health companies to care for pre-existing conditions. Both of those are very popular among Democrats and Republicans. And if the ACA goes away, we're just not sure what's going to happen to those provisions as well. And yet there's another school of thought that they may symbolically repeal this on day one, but not have most of the actual repeal go into place until after the midterm elections of 28. So,
what about the Medicaid expansion? How does that might?
Well, the Medicaid expansion is at this point they're talking about converting the money to block grants to go to the state. So. And again, the mechanisms behind that are still unclear as well. What Mayor Landrieu told us was that he's afraid that we're going to go back to the days where if someone's kid has an earache, they can't take time off work, that they wait until they have to go to an emergency room. Then they're there for 13 hours. By federal law, they have to be seen. The taxpayer picks up that, and we're just back in that cycle again.
And that's the most expensive type of care, too, when you go to the ER. And what the city has developed in the days since Katrina is this big network of community care clinics.
Absolutely. And preventative care clinics, which is
right.
excellent. And we've got a lot of clinics in many neighborhoods now that we never had before.
Right.
We still don't have Charity Hospital, obviously, but this has taken up some of that slack.
Right, with many different providers providing this care. And they have depended on these federal funds, too, to help just build up this whole system, literally with bricks and mortar and then also with staff, et cetera.
Right, and then with the expansion in July, with that money coming in, then we've been able to subsidize some people's health insurance programs. And they don't know what's going to happen either. There are people in the state that don't know in a month if they're going to have health insurance.
What about the Children's Health Insurance Program, what we call LACHIP here, which came into effect in 1998, actually. It's not part of ACA. But there is talk about changes in Medicaid. Is LACHIP going to be impacted also, do you think?
That I don't know. That we didn't look into in particular, but I'm not sure.
So at this point, it's just sort of an unknown. Are people being advised, sign up while you can?
They are being advised at the statewide level to sign up while you can because this may be a grace period. There may be some grandfathering in. A lot of these provisions may not come into play, until after the elections in 2 years. We're just not sure at this point because we've gotten so many mixed messages from Washington.
Because the state also has been saying, at first, they put their numbers, at about 370,000, 375,000. They revised that to, by next summer, they anticipate that around 400,000
and there's
folks
been
would
a
sign up
huge
for
rush.
Medicaid expansion.
There's been a huge rush since the presidential election of Louisianans trying to sign up while they can.
And the numbers show that we now have the lowest number of uninsured folks since
ever. I think Mayor Landrieu said, and immediate repeal on a nationwide level would leave 22 million people uninsured. That's a tremendous strain on what's probably an already overburdened health system.
Right. So repeal, but replace is the key word there. If there is a repeal.
If there is a repeal, which looks likely, and if there is a replace, which looks less likely, and we don't know when it would happen.
Okay.
So,
all right. Remains to be seen. Thanks a lot, Kevin. It's going to go over to Kathy right now. And the oil industry has been sort of taking some hits over these past several months, largely due to the low oil prices. What's happening that we see it with our Louisiana companies?
Right. Well, our Louisiana companies have seen this many times before. Of course, we're used to the volatility in that industry. But this prolonged period of lower prices is kind of new. And it's really taking a toll. It's more than a few hits. It's large companies, and it's a lot of long-standing companies. We've always seen in the New Orleans area, the greater New Orleans area, the main industry related industry in this area is the service sector, the companies that serve the offshore drillers or onshore activity too, but mainly the offshore drillers and production companies. And traditionally, when there's a pinch, when there's an economic downturn, it's those service companies that feel it first. They feel it deeply and quickly before the drillers, before the production companies really feel the extreme pain. Those service companies can go out of business. And we're at that point where we're seeing that, I think, down south of New Orleans in the Houma area and all the way down to the coast. You're seeing that. I think if you drive down there, you can actually visibly see the signs of the slowdown and companies that have just shut their doors and laid off people. And I think a local one that's a real bellwether is Tidewater Incorporated, one of the oldest companies in the sector, the largest service boat company, offshore service boat company in the world, in fact. And Tidewater is a 60-year-old company. It was founded here in New Orleans by the Laborde family, which also founded Otico and Gulf Island Fabrication, very successful companies. But Tidewater is kind of in a fight for its life right now. And they've talked about possible bankruptcy. They took on a great deal of debt when they still could because they were trying to bolster their fleet. And now they've alerted their share. It's a public company, and they alerted shareholders to the possibility that it could happen. A bankruptcy could occur. They've gotten extended terms on their debt, so it'll be a little longer. We'll see whether they're able to negotiate new terms or not.
That's really just amazing news because Tidewater has been just a mainstay of the industry and a major employer here.
And it really is a bellwether of the industry in the greater New Orleans area because of the type of company they are, because they've been around for so long. And they've certainly weathered the ups and downs. I mean, they've seen it all. But I think this is a low for them, and we'll see how they do. And if they should take bankruptcy, I'm sure that they'll stay in business and they'll find, they'll reorganize. And but there's always a cost to bankruptcy. Just doing a bankruptcy doesn't mean everything's wonderful again. Somebody takes a hit, and so that remains to be seen. But meanwhile, there are plenty of others that are really suffering, and it's not just the service sector anymore either. We've seen the world's biggest companies, Shell, and all of them have laid off people worldwide by the thousands.
That is just amazing to hear. What does the future look like? I mean, how are we going to build this back up?
The real problem here is a political one, and it's one that the industry has not faced before exactly because the strings are being pulled by the OPEC countries. And in past years, past decades, I guess I should say, OPEC has drawn a line. When prices fell too low, they were willing to cut production and bolster the price. But in the last 5 years or so, of course, the United States has come on strong in terms of production. Now one of the biggest producers in the world because of the shale oil production that we had. And so the glut is enormous, and OPEC is not willing to support the price and do something that's going to benefit the United States. So that's kind of where we're left. It's a standoff. And they have recently taken some steps to support the price, but whether it will last very long, we don't know.
How much would the price have to go up, do you think, to sort of...
They generally want, at least a $50 a barrel for a prolonged period in order to keep the industry on its feet. And, that's not big profits. That's just keeping it going. And they've had a lot of trouble doing that thus far.
Errol?
A few years ago, people were talking about all the prosperity in northwest Louisiana from the Haynesville Shale. That's not happening anymore. That's pretty much dried up right now.
Yeah,
and that was feeding the Shreveport economy, too.
Right. And a lot of that was natural gas, not oil. And of course, the price of natural gas has been depressed for a long time, and we've had quite a glut of that. But in other parts of the country, the shale drilling has been for oil, and that's what really contributed to the glut over worldwide.
After Deepwater Horizon, had the deepwater drilling rebounded?
It had come back. I don't know if it was to the same extent, but it was definitely coming back. Deepwater always takes a while to be affected because whatever they do, whatever drilling they do, you're not going to see the results of that production for several years. Actually bringing the product on shore. So it takes a while for them to be affected, but they have been affected. There've been cutbacks, and that's why Tidewater is in trouble right now because they don't need those service boats in the deep water.
All right, Kathy, we hope that things do rebound for our businesses here. Errol, politics, as you wrote, is never far away. We're entering a new year soon, and we'll have a new election.
And we're entering a political year sooner than we usually do. By this time next year, we will have elected a new mayor. However, we'll still have the same mayor for 5 more months. That's because there's been over the years, there's been a change in the election law where the mayoral election, which should have been the 2018 mayoral election, under the old law, the election would have been in February, at least the runoff, and then the new mayor would go into office in May. Well, there was some concern that when the election was being held, it was in conflict with Mardi Gras and football. If you recall, the day Mitch Landrieu was first elected mayor, that Saturday, was the day before the Saints were in the Super Bowl.
Right.
And it was also the first day of the parade season. And poor Mitch, what was one of the greatest political stories of all time, had a hard time just grabbing a headline. With the Saints and Super Bowl. And so there was some feeling that, it's really kind of lost. And so there was negotiation back and forth. And so they moved the election up so that it would be in October the year before. And so the primary will be in October of 2017. The runoff will be in November. But the Landrieu administration rightfully didn't want to give up any of its full term. And so they're staying in office until May, which is a pretty long lame duck period. Sort of like what we saw in Slidell over the past year, or in St. Tammany with the sheriff's office. There was like a 6-month gap. And so is this good or bad to have such a long lame duck period? I kind of think it's not a good thing. Essentially, you got 2 mayors out there and 2 factors. But anyway, what this means, though, is that the politics is going to be revving up really soon. I guess after the holidays, and it's going to come fast.
It's going to come fast. It also
The
means
treasurer's race as well, yeah.
Excuse me?
The treasurer's race as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the state treasurer's race doesn't cause quite the same excitement that a mayor's election does, but yeah.
It doesn't, but there's a lot of people
Yeah.
already jockeying.
And there's a lot of people. Yeah, the list is definitely growing. But having 5 months, the mayor will be able to enjoy the city's tricentennial as mayor. Also.
That he can be the ceremonial mayor and he can cut the
Right.
ribbons and do all those things, but at the same time, I wonder if it's going to be a thing like what Obama is seeing with Donald Trump, like someone new cutting back or changing what he's done, and so that you don't enjoy too much.
Okay, well, that'll be interesting to watch, see how that plays out. Back over to Gordon right now. And Mayor Landrieu announced this week a settlement in the Katrina-related shootings, NOPD shootings, with victims' families, and also victims themselves who had survived the shootings. What did we hear from the mayor?
Well, I mean, it was a big week, and it was sort of the end of a long story. I think there were several cases were settled of victims in the Danziger bridge shootings, as well as the Henry Glover killing and the fatal beating of Raymond Robert, who was a handyman who was beaten about a month before Hurricane Katrina by police. And these were all taken together, kind of a really dark chapter for the city and the NOPD, of course, and the subject of a number of federal investigations, along with a couple of other cases in the years after the storm. And this kind of all brought the whole thing to a close. The civil cases had been on ice because of the criminal cases were still pending. And a few months ago, we had the Danziger Bridge criminal case was finally settled with a series of guilty pleas. And I guess in the big picture, I mean, the mayor made an apology to the victims and their families, and that was kind of something he'd never seen before. And when this whole thing started out, as I'm sure everybody remembers, the police chief and the mayor, and it was a very, defensive posture, and we didn't, we were denying this happened, and we've sort of come 11 years later, I think, full circle around to accepting or acknowledging what did happen and that it should never happen again. So I think it was a big deal, and it was something we haven't seen before.
To have a city leader actually apologize. I mean, Mary Howell, who is a prominent civil rights attorney here, is quoted as saying that it's just really unprecedented. After being with all the cases that she has dealt with, she's never heard an apology like this.
Yeah, and I mean, if you remember at the beginning of this case, the police were charging a member of the Madison family, Lance Madison, with actually trying to murder police, and he was looking at potentially a long term in prison. I guess this whole thing is just a sad chapter in that you can't help there's no excusing any of this. And then at the same time, nobody won in this thing, and it's these are cops who, and a lot of cops fled the city when the storm happened, and these were some cops who stayed and made a lot of terrible decisions, and unfortunately didn't just admit their poor decisions at the time.
I think that trial actually was a kind of almost a cleansing experience for New Orleans, because the evidence that was laid out in that trial, and I covered it on a daily basis, and it was eye-popping. It was just, you couldn't even believe that all of these things happened. And I think that a lot of that is behind Landrieu's apology. It was just, it was really laid out there in black and white. And you had a trail of victims coming in and telling their stories, and it was amazing.
And the settlement amount
It was $13.3 million, and there were 17 plaintiffs. So, and I'm not sure of the exact split of the money, but and I think the city has promised that they're actually going to pay this judgment, unlike many judgments that are.
Because sometimes someone who's awarded a judgment can wait for a long time to get it from the city.
Yeah.
We should emphasize, though, at the time it was a different mayor and a different police chief, a different police department. It was really an abandonment of leadership at the time. When you read it, I mean, there was nobody in authority really telling these people, don't do that. They were pretty much acting on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I mean, I think that it was just a terrible chapter in the city's history. These guys felt like they were all alone, and I think a lot of people would have forgiven them much more easily had they just owned up to what they did instead of engaged in a major cover-up, which was really, I think, what made it such an even darker chapter. I mean, it's not okay when police kill people that are unarmed, but it's you can understand a little bit what they were going through.
A very sad chapter. This chapter come to a close. Time to look ahead. Errol?
Well, one thing you can always count on when it's Christmas Day is that 12 days later will be the beginning of the carnival season on January 6th. This year, Mardi Gras is February 28th, which is fairly late. Last year it was February 9th. And so the carnival season will be 19 days longer, almost 3 weeks this year, which is that much longer we're exposed to king cakes.
That's right.
So just be prepared for it.
Thing. All right, Gordon?
Well, I was going to pump the advocate for a second here. We're going to be opening our new headquarters, I hope, next month on St. Charles Avenue, just downtown from Lee Circle, or whatever we're going to be calling Lee Circle in the future. So.
All right, that's a good thing, too. Kathy.
Back to Tidewater for a moment. We will be hearing more about that as January rolls around, because we'll hear whether they were able to arrive at terms with their lenders and see what the next chapter is for Tidewater.
All right. Kevin?
Last year, CNN came down for New Year's, and Don Lemon and a few people looked like they had a few cocktails on the air. Apparently, it was a successful experiment. This year, they're going to be on Frenchman Street at the Spotted Cat. ABC is going to be broadcasting New Year's festivities from here, so I think the city's going to be marketing us as a New Year's destination.
Yeah, it looks like it definitely has become that. It was a fun time had by everybody. All right, thanks a lot for joining us, guys. Thank you all for being with us. Have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, wonderful holiday, and we'll see you next week. Good evening.